if you could, please tell me and also our listeners a little bit about yourself, who you are, where you're from, and what you do.
My name is Tina. I live in Brisbane in Australia. I am a mum of 2 young kids. They're in school. I have a husband, I have 2 cats, and we recently got a dog as well. So
Wow.
life is busy. I've spent most of my career as an accountant. I'm a qualified accountant. I've also done some stuff in the health and fitness space. I'm a qualified PT as well. Very multi-passionate. And most recently, as you said, I've become an ADHD life coach, which I absolutely love. It's very along the same lines of health and fitness coaching for me. Just the helping people is absolutely what I've been put on this earth to do. So yeah, I love helping other ADHDers as well.
Well, that's awesome. that certainly is a mouthful.
Yeah, it is. Whenever I tell people about my career history, they're like, wow, that is, different ends of the spectrum, going from something like coaching to accounting.
Yeah.
But and I used to feel so embarrassed about it, but I'm like, you know what, that's just me. That's, and that's a lot of us as well. A lot of, I speak to some people who have had so many different careers.
Yeah. When were you officially diagnosed with ADHD, and what made you want to get in a diagnosis?
I was officially diagnosed about a year ago. I got diagnosed after my son, which is, I think, how a lot of adult women get diagnosed. So after he got diagnosed, I set out to learn as much as I could. My understanding of what ADHD was, was the kid in my school, which it was ADD back then. So, and he was a very, very typical ADD child boy. Yeah. And my son is different to that. So I was so confused about, what this meant and what it meant for him as well. So I set out to learn as much as I could. And it became very evident not long into my research that, there were things there that I could see in myself, whether as a child or now. Yeah. So then I switched, and I still learn about, ADHD in children, but I very quickly switched my research to ADHD in adults. Mm-hmm. And that's when I realized that everything that I was reading was just about my life. And wow. I couldn't believe what I was reading. I was like, this is the thing. And not only, I didn't know that adults really had ADHD, to be honest. I've never really put into thought what happens after childhood when somebody gets diagnosed with ADHD, but yeah.
Wow. So what was your initial reaction after receiving the diagnosis, after having your eyes open to ADHD and what it was?
For me, it was mostly relief. And that's because I didn't realize, but I had a hyper focused on finding out as much as I can and learning as much as I can about ADHD. So I knew even before I got my diagnosis, I was like, this is too much of a coincidence for it not to be for me. And, it wasn't like I tick some of the boxes. I tick most of the boxes, if not all of them. So I knew I had it. So for me, it was relief. Because it was that validation of, yes, this is right. I was right. But, there was other emotions as well. There was, there was that resentment that it didn't get picked up earlier. There was this one the day that I realized that I came to the realization that I was like, yes, you have this. I just cried most of the day. I cried for that resentment. I cried that, I had no idea. I was scared as well. I was like, what does this mean for me in my career? Are people going to judge me? Because that's the thing, even though I realized I had it, I didn't know how many other adults were living with this as well. So I felt very isolated and scared too. I was like, am I going to get judged? Is my child going to get judged? So there was I call it a bit of an emotional roller coaster because it was very, very up and down, but mostly relief that I'd found the reason why I'd been struggling so much.
So after your diagnosis, would you say that you were better able or better equipped to better help your son after your knowledge and awareness of ADHD increased?
Yes, to a certain extent. I'm much more understanding now of the things that he goes through and what he might struggle with and why he might struggle with that. But, you know, it's very much like ADHD adults, even though we get the same diagnosis and at the core, there's those things that, you know, those symptoms or traits, whatever you want to call them, that give us the diagnosis. They're still their own person and he's still his own person. And it's, my heart goes out to anybody who works with children. It is so hard to get them to, you know, I guess, look at the world with a more open mind, because they are children and they are very, you know, very self-focused and all that kind of stuff. So it's very, very different to, you know, trying to work with adults. But you know, I just try to make him more aware of, you know, things that might be going on, you know, let him know more about his diagnosis and things like that. So yeah, it definitely lets me help him a little bit more now that I have all this knowledge and I'm diagnosed as well. And my daughter's going for her assessment next month.
Oh, wow.
But yeah, it's still quite hard. Yeah.
I'm pretty sure, because every person with ADHD, like, we're all different. We're not all the same. Like, I'm pretty sure that my mom has it. I don't think she's ever got a diagnosis. And I believe my grandfather had it. And I think he may have passed it on to us, possibly. But I don't think he ever had a diagnosis either. Like, in his time, you know, getting a diagnosis for mental health, for ADHD and everything wasn't, like, a priority back then. So no one really did that. So I don't know. It's just like a speculation that it might possibly, that might be the family dynamics as far as ADHD. Yeah. I know that you had recently posted a reel talking about postnatal anxiety. And I actually really resonated with it, to be honest, because I wanted to talk a little bit about that, like, as a parent, what it feels like after having a child, especially if it's your first child, and even if you have another child, how that affects somebody with ADHD, like a little bit about ADHD and parenting, basically. Like, let's dive into that subject.
And I'm going to give a bit of a disclaimer here that these thinking and talking about these things is still a little bit raw. So if I get a bit emotional, I'm sure as ADHDers we can understand.
Yeah, no pressure.
Yeah, it was a rough time having after having the kids. Not so much the first one. You know, I really had, as we all do, I guess, I had this idea in my head of what being a parent was going to look like. And I was undiagnosed at this time. Yeah, after my first child, it wasn't too bad. It was, you know, I could cope. Even though I could see some postnatal anxiety there. Yeah. I could cope. You know, it was my first baby. I was on maternity leave. All I had to do was really just focus on him. But it was really after my daughter was born, so my second one, because, you know, I had a lot more on my plate. Yeah. I wasn't coping. At that point, I think I'd left. Yeah, I had issues with my work that I was at when I got pregnant with my first baby. So I wasn't working, and, you know, that really doesn't help me because I absolutely love working. So here I was, this undiagnosed adult with ADHD in what I felt was a small space, because our house at the time was tiny, and I was trying to, my kids were they were a year and a half apart, so they were quite close in age. Yeah. And it was tough. And, you know, there was a lot of days that, you know, my thoughts would be quite dark, and really the only thing keeping me going was the love for those kids. Aww. It was something else. So, yeah, and that just went on for years. I don't even know how I came out of it. Like, as I said, it was more just, my coping mechanism was just focusing on them, and, you know, hopefully that I'd get out of it at some stage. Like, I really tried to focus on other things. You know, I tried to focus on taking them places and but it was hard because meeting other people, like, because I had that anxiety there, like I'd want to meet other people and get them play dates and things like that, but then my anxiety would stop me going places, and it was a really hard time to get through. And I just wish, like, I hear about because I have a lot of people with ADHD that I know now, and some of those are having babies, and I'm just like, you're just in such a better position knowing that you've got ADHD. And parenting is still hard, don't get me wrong. I'm not saying that they're going to have, this easy ride. But it was really, really tough. So, and the other thing was that, like, after I started telling people, that I had been diagnosed, not diagnosed with ADHD at the time, I try not to say misdiagnosed because the anxiety was there. So I wasn't misdiagnosed with anxiety. It was just I didn't get diagnosed with ADHD as well. Yeah. And after I told people about the anxiety, they're like, yeah, I thought something was wrong. And I'm like, why didn't anybody say anything? Like, I think back and I'm like, all these people, had this inkling that something might be wrong. Yeah. And, I just felt like I had to fend for myself. But anyway, things got a little bit better once the kids started going to school because, it was easier to manage. And then, once I was diagnosed with ADHD, I feel like my life is just completely different. It is, I was speaking to somebody not long ago and they said getting diagnosed was the best thing that could have happened for their mental health. And 100% same for me, 100%. So even though, and I really had to, once I got diagnosed with ADHD, I had to let go of that perfect parenting picture that I've had in my head since, before I became a mother. I just had to let that go because parenting for us does look different. It doesn't, we're not always on the ball. We're not always attentive, even though, I'm sure we all love our children more than absolutely anything. It does come down to our energy, our attentiveness. Sometimes we just need to take a step back and just be like, I'm not doing that today, or you just need to give me some space. And even with our energy, sometimes I feel like I am world's best mother. And then other times I'm like, grab what you want for dinner because my energy levels are just, completely down here. So I think for me, it's just getting rid of that, what parenting looks like for other people and just be like, well, what does it look like for me? And me is an adult with ADHD with potentially 2 kids with ADHD. Like our family dynamic is completely different to what I might see on, one of those parenting pages on Instagram or Facebook or something. So
I really appreciate, Tina, you for being so vulnerable right now. I know that wasn't an easy question to answer, and I honestly felt a lot of the things that you were saying. Granted, my children are a lot younger than yours because I have a 2-year-old going on 3, and then my son is only like 5 months going on 6 months. But so I don't know if they have ADHD as of yet, and I won't know until later, of course. But the thought of, them possibly having it and me having to deal with my own ADHD and then also cope with theirs and all living together in one household. And then my husband is neurotypical, doesn't have ADHD, and him going insane because we all have ADHD. And then I just imagine chaos.
Yeah.